Welcome to Killer Psychologist. Today we're going to talk about the suspicious death of Kayla Seago, and we have her sister Lexi here with us today to talk about her sister. And we also have Dr. Craig Wetter here today, who is going to weigh in on this case. And we're both going to discuss what our role can be as forensic psychologists and why we are retained in cases like this, which would be called a psychological autopsy. So, in cases where there is suspicious circumstances surrounding someone's death, it should be investigated. And we believe in this case that it was not thoroughly investigated. We're going to go through some of the details of this case, of things that we think were clearly missed. And then moving forward, where do we go from here? And what laws are in place that could potentially help cold cases like this when we believe that someone should have been indicted or potentially charged for Kayla's death? So, Lexi, I really appreciate you reaching out to me. And I know we did an episode on this before for your sister, and it's been almost a year, but there's so much more to uncover here and tell. And this, I'm in California, and this case is in Illinois. And I know, Lexi, where are you located today?
I am currently in Las Vegas.
Right. So you and your other sister, you're not, you weren't even living close to the area where your sister Kayla was.
No, at the time I was. However, I did move after I, got turned to an adult, and I've been here ever since.
So tell me about Kayla. Tell me what happened and how you found out.
Absolutely. So first of all, me and Kayla were extremely close. We actually had plans on that Sunday. We were supposed to get together, possibly get our nails done, and we even had plans for that Friday to go bowling with our brother. She was supposed to pick me and Cherokee up that day. And it hit about 10 a.m. and something just felt very odd about that because my sister was an early bird. So when it hit 10 a.m. and she wasn't, banging at the front door, I knew something was wrong. And I checked my phone. I actually tried to call her and her phone was turned off. And I checked my phone and I had got a message from Billy's little sister, Oh, I'm sorry. Can we edit that part out? I don't know if I should say her name.
Yeah, Heidi can edit it out.
Okay.
Heidi, is the sound okay? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So I actually found out by a family member of his messaged me and said, "I'm so sorry." And I was highly confused, but my stomach dropped. I knew that something was wrong. I already had a feeling. So I ran down to my mom and I just told her, like, Kayla's not answering her phone. She was supposed to get us. And my mom told me to call around the hospitals because unfortunately, as sad as this is, that was almost starting to become the norm. When I didn't know where Kayla was, we knew that there was something wrong. Despite our age difference, we were extremely close and there was nothing that she didn't tell me. So I called around all the hospitals and nothing. And then I finally got a message back from his family member. And that family member said that my sister committed suicide and that he was down at the station answering police questioning. And from that moment on, my suspicions have, been there from the very start. However, as I began to dig deep into this and look at the reports and, I went to several meetings with coroners and I've even got messages with detectives and I've done a lot of my own investigation and I just can't really understand why there's so much question surrounding it when everyone agrees that it's very suspicious, but there's nobody willing to take it the next step, which would be to look at the injuries on her neck.
Well, let's talk about the role of a grand jury because this information was taken to the grand jury. So let's talk about that. I'm just going to pull it up here. So in Illinois, the grand jury is a group of citizens convened to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to charge someone with a criminal offense. So a grand jury typically consists of 16 to 23 members selected from the community. So members are chosen through a process similar to a jury duty for trials, but they serve for longer periods of time. So a grand jury, their purpose is not to determine guilt or innocence. Instead, they decide whether there is probable cause to indict or formally charge a person with a crime. So during that process, prosecutors can present evidence, including witness testimony, documents, and other materials. So the defendant and their attorney typically do not have the right to be present or to cross-examine witnesses, and the grand jury deliberates in secret. And so the final outcome is that at least 12 members must agree to a true bill of indictment or formal charges. So if fewer than 12 members agree, the jury issues a no bill and no charges are filed. So Lexi sent the information that was presented to the grand jury to Dr. Wetter and I to look at. And the coroner's report is very light with information. So we have it up right now. It's a page and a half. And I just looked up the coroner's information who wrote this report, and she has since passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So her name was Elizabeth Sue Fiducia. So she retired shortly after this case the next year, and then she actually passed away in 2024 at the age of 80. So she is no longer available to get information about this case. And this report was very thin. It doesn't give you it's leaving out a lot of details. And so if I were the grand jury and only had that to go on, it wouldn't be a lot.
Yeah. Which is kind of the issue that we're running into because unfortunately Kayla was cremated. So between the report and the crime scene photo.
Whose decision was that?
Whose decision was what? I'm so sorry.
Whose decision was it to cremate?
Unfortunately her absent father. So he unfortunately that's how it went. So me and Kayla share a father who has been absent both of our entire lives. But my mother, who is not her biological mother, has raised Kayla since she was 8 years old. So that's kind of how me and her were so close despite not knowing our father. And it fell into his hands, and unfortunately that's what they decided, and I wish that it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to bring up, there's a new Senate bill that just passed. It's Senate Bill 989. And essentially, this bill is going to mandate coroners to inquire into deaths suspected to be suicides, especially when the deceased has a known history of being victimized by domestic violence. And In cases like this, the coroners, they should be consulting with a board-certified forensic pathologist to help assist with determining the cause of death accurately. And so before concluding the cause of death, law enforcement are required to investigate and interview family members and get relevant information. And so it can be a fatal mistake if this evidence is no longer available. So, such as now the decedent has been cremated, they can no longer take a second look at the autopsy.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Let's talk about the coroner who was on duty at the time. And yes, he faced some charges himself, which were pretty suspicious. That was happening around the same time. Can you tell me what happened to that coroner?
Correct. So there was originally a coroner's deputy who then, like, very shortly after Kayla's death, was promoted to coroner. And he is who I had a face-to-face meeting with. He was also part of that grand jury. So he was one of the people on there, is what he told me. The very room that he and I met in, he said that they sat at that very table and discussed the case. And unfortunately, they just couldn't. What was that?
Wait a second. How is the deputy coroner on the grand jury?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Was he on the jury or did he give testimony to the grand jury?
He told me he was on the jury. I could be maybe mistaken, but for sure that's what he told me at the meeting. He said that he was part of the jury, and he was one of the ones who said that it was suspicious due to the domestic violence.
Okay. So later, that deputy coroner was actually charged criminally.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
He and his wife.
Yep. And so unfortunately that bumped him out of it too as well. So I mean, another odd thing about that meeting with him was that I asked to see the alleged photo, which, side note, for people who may not know, there was an alleged photo that my sister sent. And he told me that he had no access to the photo. However, later on in another meeting, very shortly after that, maybe about 2 months or so, I met with the detective and he had the photo. So, and no, they will not let me see the photo. Unfortunately, I have tried that, but they said, unfortunately, we need somebody who is licensed to get the photo.
Okay, we kind of missed a part there that's going to make it confusing because we didn't say what he was actually charged with. So I was trying to pull it up here to get the right information. So let's pause. We need to explain that.
For sure.
Yeah, there was a lot of him. I looked at the case. There was he was accused of embezzling funds, stealing funds from decedents, stealing personal property effects from decedents, charging families for funeral services that were not rendered, those sorts of things. So he did a number of alleged, he pled guilty and he ended up getting county jail time. He did not go to state prison for this from what I saw in the records. Lexi might have more details on that, but it looked like he only did 6 months in the jail and was put on probation, which seems to be a fairly light sentence for at least the allegations that I saw in the case.
And you have to question one's ability to do their job if they're embezzling, right? And they're committing crimes for their employer, right? They're not morally or ethically intact. So we're talking about a serious role as a coroner in determining cause of death. And this affects, or say, people's lives. This outcome is so critical. This is everything. So this whole report that was drafted by the coroner and presented to the grand jury I'm going to tell you my opinion is they did not do a thorough job. It does not look like it was thoroughly investigated. And I mean, Dr. Wetter, you can weigh in on this, but we write reports of lengthy magnitude, maybe dozens of hours of research. The devil is in the details, all of this information. And I say what's most alarming that wasn't in the report is that there was, in fact, domestic violence, and it was well documented medically as well, because she had sustained prior hospital visits and had physical injuries. And there was a domestic violence restraining order. I don't have that restraining order or the contents of it, but that would be information that should be included in the information that would be presented to the grand jury. So all the details of the restraining order and then her report of having experienced prior strangulation in the relationship. But not only that, but that her partner, he was in fact a convicted criminal. And so he actually had been sentenced to prison for a crime similar, aggravated battery and strangulation. And so he served time 3 years at Stateville Correctional Center. So that's for strangulation. So now Kayla Seago, she reports that he had been strangling her in the relationship. And there's a restraining order. And so now we can go over the facts of what happened that night. Was that he had no business being at her house, although his version is that he responded to her text to come over and found her hanging in the basement. But when asked by the police to produce this information of the text or these pictures that he said she sent, that they didn't in fact exist, he could not produce them and said he deleted them. So that sounds like a lie.
Yeah. Also something that's always overlooked, I feel like, is when he arrived at the resident, he found the back door wide open. Her medications were downstairs, almost to maybe look like she would have overdosed or something. And as well as a knife was found downstairs. And when I actually met with him, well, not met with him, I'm sorry. It was at the funeral. He walked up to me and I'll never forget what he said to me. He was like, the knife was down there because she didn't mean to do this. He kept saying she didn't mean to do this. And then he told me that me and her kids are all that he has left of her. And so ever since, I've just really been on this mission to just, find the truth, because I just think that's so odd for him to say. And the knife being downstairs just doesn't make any sense either, let alone the injury on her lip.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the laceration to her lip because, again, if we take if we make an assumption this was a suicide, and I'm calling it an assumption because I've investigated hundreds of suicides, in my previous career, and there are cases, that I have seen where individuals, a suicide has been staged. So my question, when I looked at the coroner's report, so there was a pathologist that did an actual autopsy that actually performed the autopsy. And of course, his findings were that it was death was asphyxia due to hanging, is what the coroner report, the pathologist stated. But there was an indication of a laceration on the lip, and I'm wondering, when someone is going to hang themselves, they're not generally going to cut their lip. I mean, that's not something that we would normally see. And the issue of the medication bottles being present near her down in the basement is also suspect. And the reason I say it's suspect is that I looked at the toxicology, the tox screen that looked at the two primary medications that were at issue were alprazolam, which is what's called a benzodiazepine. It's for anxiety. and then fluoxetine, which is Prozac. And that's an SSRI antidepressant that can be used to treat anxiety. It can also be used to treat depression. But those levels were within therapeutic range, meaning it doesn't appear that they're, from what I saw from the talks, the values, they weren't. It didn't appear that a lethal dose of either of those had been taken. So, again, these are things that I would be, if I was an investigator, I would be asking questions about, if it's why is the medication in the basement? When my presumption is that's not her bedroom, correct? She's not living in the basement. So why is the medication in the basement? Why is her cell phone found upstairs? Which,
Right.
again, those stuck out as, those are things that I find to be, I'm just kind of putting on an investigator hat right now. And if I was investigating this, I would have questions about, right? And, again, I can't draw an inference that anything was staged, but there's evidence, right? There's things that don't make sense to me. Like if I was an investigator, those things don't make sense. So I don't know has that been looked at, or have people talked about that?
Yeah, so we do have a current detective who also has overlooked it. And honestly, we have the same questions and the first detective as well. However, just a side note about her lips. So originally, the lip laceration came from a party. That's where they were at, where they allegedly got into an argument. And she went home and allegedly sent this photo and a text saying she was going to commit suicide. So in the photo, however, her lip is not busted. That's noted in the report as well, that her lip is not busted in this photo. But when they find her body, her lip is busted. So this photo doesn't make sense at all. I don't know if it could have possibly been a past photo. I truly don't know what this photo could be, because like I said, they won't let me see it. I don't even know if she's alive in the photo, to be quite honest with you. However, what I do know is that they said that her lip is not busted. So that part doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, the investigators obviously would. I'm assuming they looked at his phone. If he's claiming that a photo was sent, or a photo was texted to him, correct?
Yeah.
Prior to her. Okay, so they obviously
had no evidence of this photo, neither from Kayla's phone nor his phone. They had no evidence of the photo nor the text. The photo was later retrieved, but they didn't say when. But this alleged photo. Yeah.
So we don't know when it was taken, right? We just don't know any of the details about. Yeah.
Correct.
So those are unanswered questions as well. So with the Rockford Police Department, what's the status here in terms of, like, you said you hired a private investigator, I'm assuming. Do you have a private detective that's looking into this?
No. So we do currently just have a detective who is with the Rockford Police.
Okay.
So where I kind of left off with him is that he said that it's in my hands to find a forensic pathologist or a medical examiner to get a second opinion, so that we can further bring this to the other forensic pathologist, the original one on the report. And because he won't look at it until we present him with evidence that this could have been something else. Because as far as right now, he said he's still undetermined.
And this is Dr. Mark Peters, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, go ahead. That's true. I mean, that's true that the pathologist is not going to necessarily independently open up another inquiry unless directed by law enforcement or, some investigative authority. He has to have some authority to do that. So that does make sense.
I just find it concerning how much information was left out. Things would have been so much different had the grand jury been presented more information. Prior criminal history, prior acts of violence, like he was had a prior conviction on this, and messages that she's mentioning, she's not suicidal. that she's scared, that he was violent with her, well documented, restraining order and restraining order violations, documented history of strangulation. So much information that just wasn't presented. And so I just think of my role if I was on a grand jury and them leaving all that information out. And that's the psychological side of things. So it's not just the coroner. We can't just go with just what the coroner finds in their report, right? Leaving all that other evidence out was crucial. And I think they really missed it. And unfortunately, this didn't result in an indictment. So there was no charge filed, but it doesn't have to end there. That is not the only way to get charges, right, Dr. Wetter? What is another route they could have taken?
So grand jury, you described what the role of a grand jury is. And so prosecutors have two approaches they can take when they make decisions about whether or not to charge, to formally charge. In other words, to formally file a criminal complaint. So the grand jury is one route, which is the route they took. The second route is through the complaint procedure, meaning the prosecutor has the authority as the prosecutor to bring formal charges in the form of a complaint. In other words, they don't go through a grand jury. It's based on information and belief at the time. It's based on the facts that they have in evidence or whatever they have in the reports. Now, remember, when you go to a grand jury, the standard for indictment is preponderance. The preponderance standard is essentially in place. So in other words, probable cause, meaning that it's more likely than not there's evidence that this crime occurred or that this defendant, this person that's a subject of the investigation, has committed this crime. That's very different than the standard that a prosecutor is looking at when they bring charges separately. In other words, when a prosecutor is going to bring charges, if I'm the DA, I'm looking at a case and I'm looking at, can I prove the elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt? Can I prove all the elements of the offense? In this case, it would be murder, right? In this case, if we were to go with the theory that this was actually a staged suicide, and again, this is a theory, right? But it's a staged suicide covering up a murder. So the prosecutor has to prove all that beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a much higher standard or higher evidentiary burden that a prosecutor has to reach. So sometimes what you'll see, especially in cases where, the evidence is not entirely clear. In other words, they don't have really solid evidence, solid facts. A smoking gun, so to speak, right? They will then sometimes present a case to the grand jury and let the grand jury arrive at a true bill, basically, or a charging decision. And remember, that's based on probable cause. It's a different standard. And of course, then that person gets, once indicted, then they go to trial. At that point they move towards trial, or possibly they get the case resolved through plea deal, whatever. But generally, it'll go to trial. So that's the difference. So it's it's a strategic decision that the prosecutor has to make in terms of which direction they're going to go. So, and again, I don't know. Lexi may have talked to the detective about this, but what has there been conversations with and this is Winnebago County, Illinois? Is that correct? Is that's the county that this the jurisdiction?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So have they talked? Have they had conversations with the current prosecutor? Because remember, murder doesn't have a statute of limitations on it. So if the theory is right, if the theory is murder, if the theory that you're looking at is murder, then there's no statute of limitations. And, cold cases get opened up all the time. So I'm wondering if there's been if you've talked to the detective about this, and if you've had a conversation about, hey, have you talked to the prosecutor about what's missing here? What else, what do we need? What would we need to get this over, right? That evidentiary burden that they need, the prosecutor needs.
Correct. So yes, I have spoke to him. I don't know, has he spoken to a prosecutor, I'm so sorry. But I can definitely try and figure out if he has. But what he told me that we need currently right now is that we need somebody to overlook the markings on her neck and just cause of death in general, because that's what we're going to need to move forward to determine if this could have been a homicide, a strangulation, or anything of that nature. Originally, one detective, the first one, told me that he wasn't really sure why they put hanging when we don't know if she was hanging.
Yeah, because when she was found, she wasn't hanging, right? She was on the ground, from what I saw in the report. Is that correct?
Correct. The only one who allegedly witnessed her hanging is him.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this is suspicious. It's clearly, as Dana said, we look at past behaviors of individuals, and so when we've got history of people that are, that have history of domestic violence as perpetrators, particularly if their way of controlling somebody is through, attempting to strangle them, or asserting this power and control over their victim, it really raises a level of suspicion about these facts. At least in my estimation, I would be suspicious in terms of the way I approached it and the investigation.
Absolutely. That's actually why I reached out to Dana. Because one of, as you were saying, kind of part of the control, one of the reports says that it was a dog leash that she was hanging by, and the other says a belt. And I'm
I
still
saw that.
unclear. To this day, I'm unclear on it. However, if it was a dog leash, which is one of the reasons why I did find Dana, I actually found Dana on TikTok. One of the reasons why I reached out was because I thought that was like a huge symbolization in a way, because she did have a dog, but at the time of her death, she no longer had that dog. He actually was really mean to the dog, like very mean to him, and the dog was terrified of him. And I don't know what happened, but we know that the dog got out and never came back home. So I do think that maybe the weapon of choice, if we can call it that, I think that can be really important as well. And another reason why I reached out to Dana was because his behavior on social media after my sister's death was extremely suspicious. I mean, first of all, as long as I've known him, he's called himself VTK. That's his rapping name. And second of all, him and his friends began very shortly, I mean, less than a year or maybe a year after Kayla's death, they started posting posts about BTK, the killer. And he was like, LOL, this is the one who I was talking about. And not only that, but there was also one where he put a photo up, and I'm talking less than a year after Kayla died, and put a photo up of a woman in a trash can. And he said, sometimes you just got to throw that B word away and get a new one, or something along those lines. And I thought that spoke volumes about who we're dealing with, honestly.
Yeah. So I want to ask just a clarifying question about Mr. Opsel. So so he was arrested for this attempted murder. I think Dana had said this occurred prior. I just want to make sure. Was it prior to Kayla's death, or was it after? One of the stories I looked at said 2017, so I'm not sure when that previous crime happened.
Correct. So in 2017, this took place 2 years after Kayla's death. So Kayla's was in 2015, and this was in 2017. And it was very interesting because I met face to face with that victim, who she told me that she told him that she knows that he did that to Kayla, that he murdered Kayla, and he looked her in the eyes and said that she'll never be able to prove it. She she gave me all the information she could. Actually, recently, she did speak with one of our detectives. So nothing, I don't know how much I could say on that. But as of right now, to my knowledge, I don't think she has any further contact with him. But yes, that did take place after Kayla's death, which I immediately, as soon as I learned about it, I called the detectives and tried to get figure out what's going on. And I was told that they are two separate cases.
Well, that's true. They are separate cases, but when you look at modus, which is the manner in which a crime is committed, there's starking similarities here, right? In terms of what he did, and he was convicted of this, and surprisingly did 3 years, which for attempted murder. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with Illinois law in terms of like when attempted murder generally has a longer prison term. So this was probably a plea deal. I think they probably worked out some kind of a deal. And, this is what happens. You get this plea deal. Now, again, I get why prosecutors do this, but at the same time, 3 years for attempted murder? Seriously?
Yeah. And you can get a plea deal on the table real quickly, take it before anyone looks at anything too closely. Just basically snatch that up and take 3, because if anyone looks a little bit longer for any amount of time, then we're going to see that you have a whole bunch of other things going on. In fact, it looked like he served another 6-year prison sentence in August 6th of 2006 for robbery. And that's just public information. So look, I didn't even pull his criminal file. I'm just saying
we don't have his criminal history, right? So that's again, we don't have all the we don't know what else maybe he's been arrested for.
Those are just the highlights, online criminal search. So there is much more to be revealed. If he's done a couple prison terms, but very specifically, he broke in, beat up his girlfriend, strangled her nearly to death. And so in this case, Kayla, he could have gotten a fight because there were prior instances where he's punched her in the face and caused her injuries. So say they got in a fight. She had injuries to her mouth or lip, cracked lip, bleeding. She even had blood on her hands. So if he used manual strangulation, then to a certain degree, and then decided, oh no, I went too far, and then to cover it up, taking what's around or available. So there wasn't a noose. There was not. And that the language is really important, that we shouldn't be saying, we need to say exactly what the item is. Yeah. It's very important. So a dog collar is very, very different than, describing it as a ligature and they really failed to correctly identify that in the autopsy report. That's alarming. So a dog collar, I have all kinds of questions about that, how it was suspended, how it was used, the injuries, all the details regarding that, because manual strangulation, that could be, he could have even used ligature as a way to strangle, meaning the dog collar to strangle, and then used it to mount or hang. But all these details really were lacking in the report, and it really wasn't well done. And that's very disturbing for me, because it was just an epic fail as far as their final presentation to the grand jury. But now here we are. This didn't just happen. This happened again, right? He actually went to prison for this other crime of attempted murder. So, and now we have a man that's pretty cocky, pretty confident, posting stuff online, wanting to be the BTK, making statements to his other girlfriends, about how he did this or how he just bragging, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really only a matter of time where something comes up again and he's going to have a new violation of the law, right?
Correct.
But where do we go from here? And maybe Craig can help answer this question. So, is this the point where paying for your own private investigator to get some boots on the ground, to start giving information to the police, to help reopen the case? And, can we help? Can I write a psychological autopsy report with all this information in there to put together and present it to the prosecution so they could potentially file a charge against him.
Yeah, I mean, so the adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, is, I think, salient here. And what I mean by that is that persistence, with really, really staying on it with both whoever's handling the cold cases at Rockford, the Rockford Police Department. You want to get their ear, and if it doesn't look like they're actively moving forward in terms, I would make sure, is this case open back up again? In other words, this is a cold case, right? So have they opened this case back up? And is there a detective actively investigating it? And yeah, I mean, it certainly, if you have the resources, it doesn't hurt to have an independent private investigator looking into this. Because one of the other things that, again, needs to be looked at here, and I didn't see this in the original incident report that was done, which is, they were at a gathering, right? Previous to this, right? Were these people that were at this gathering interviewed by the police at all? Did anybody witness this altercation? And I didn't see it in the report. Perhaps it's in a supplement or something. But and then, timelines are really important here too, in terms of like when he allegedly received this text from her that, she's telling him that that she's suicidal. And of course, he then says he rushes over to the residence, right? And then only to find her. Timelines are critical. So timelines, all of that stuff. Who did he talk to? Who did he interact with initially? So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions here that, I think need to be re-examined in a little more detail. Because you really have, that's a thorough investigation. You might uncover a witness or somebody that has information that could turn this case, right? And get this thing potentially moving. Because remember, the prosecutor is going to need, in order to bring formal charges, if they're going to go a complaint route, is they need evidence that they are going to be able to prove up beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, it doesn't mean they need direct evidence. They can use circumstantial evidence. So I want to ask, this question about, we didn't touch on this, but this is an important piece. So when you talk about a psychological autopsy, one of the things we want to explore is, this whole concept of suicidality. My understanding is there's no evidence that she had been suicidal thinking. She was very future oriented, from my understanding, right? In terms of like her, things that she was planning on doing. So these are things that we would want to know about, because, again, the theory is that they're saying that this is a suicide. Well, show the evidence that supports that, and again, sometimes people are private about, they conceal their internal thoughts of wanting to end their life. I'm not saying that there's always warning signs, but a careful examination of looking at, like, why would she kill herself? Like, what would be the rationale there? Like,
what's really interesting is that I actually have her medical records, and in her medical records, I could actually give you the exact date. So she passed away on January 11th. It was on either the 9th or the 10th. She had a regular checkup with our family doctor, where she stated she was not suicidal. We're talking 1 or 2 days right here. We're talking right before her death. One moment. I'm so sorry. Got a lot of papers. It was her last visit was on January 7th. Okay, so it was January 7th, and this allegedly happened in the early hours of January 11th. And they stated on the medical records that Kayla is not suicidal.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. All of her behaviors weren't someone who was someone that was planning their death at all. And I'm looking at this autopsy report. Well, actually, I'm looking at this investigative report here, and I'm just looking at it further. So just all the details. So we don't even, it's just he says he saw her hanging, but because there was a nylon belt allegedly attached to a pipe in the ceiling. So it's saying that it appeared to be cut, right?
Yeah,
So you can
he's
cut that.
claiming he
He's
cut.
claiming it to be
Yeah.
cut. And also, it's like I don't know why they're not mentioning the dog collar. So if the dog collar is attached to a belt from a pipe in the ceiling, all these details are so important. And the symbolism of the dog collar with her dog mysteriously going missing and what that means, right? The statements he made after her death that were very irreverent about her, using the name bitch and, just throwing away, your girlfriend or replacing her. All of those statements can be used and should be used and put together. Any of that information, if you have it, collect it, put it together. And those are all very alarming behaviors, especially BTK, which we know was a serial killer, and BTK stood for blind, torture, and kill. And we know that he strangled his victims, and that was his MO. And, any police investigation that is all kinds of red flags are going off there. And it seemed like he was gloating afterwards, being more confident and cocky to say things online because he wasn't charged. If he was charged, right, I'm sure we wouldn't be seeing or hearing from him on social media.
Correct. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so the new Senate Bill 989, which passed in September of 2024, it's a law that's going to mandate that in cases like this, there's more time allotted to investigate instead of closing the case too soon. This case was closed too soon and shouldn't have been. And I don't know how this law is going to work. Like, are we going to get more funding passed on through the government? Like, how is this actually going to be implemented? And we don't know that yet. And I don't have the answers about going in the past for cold cases, because there are a lot of cold cases that have been absolutely suspicious deaths. And a lot of them have to do with staged suicides, involving strangulation. There are a lot of them. And I hope that just bringing awareness and talking about this, we can make some changes and hold these offenders accountable, because he seems like he's a serial offender. So it's a pattern of behavior over time. And these people seem to get more confident each time they break the law and get away with it. It sends the message to them that they're invincible. And so it's really scary to know that this person had no accountability at all. And that's why I wanted to bring awareness to this issue and for justice for your sister, Kayla. Like, but what can we do? I'm willing to help put my time into it. I can, but I want to do the right thing. So if they need a report, for a psychological autopsy, I'm willing to help put something together. And if they give me all the information, I'm willing to do my part that can be helpful, or anybody that's listening to the episode, if they want to help you out. Where can they find you, Lexi?
So I can usually be reached on TikTok or maybe even my email address. So my TikTok, I'm so sorry. I am coming down from a cold, actually. My TikTok is @_ LEXIJADE_. So that's @_LexiJade_. There's more in-depth episodes on Kayla's death specifically and his behaviors afterwards on there as well. Otherwise, I can be reached by my email at Lexi, Lexi, .jade, Jade, .1298 @gmail.com.
Well, I really appreciate you talking about this today. And I know it's going to be 10 years coming up here in 2025. And that's a long time that's passed. And it can be harder and harder as time passes to get law enforcement to reopen a case.
Absolutely.
I was going to make one other recommendation, in addition to, thinking about a private investigator who obviously could be very helpful here, but getting a second forensic pathologist, somebody who is, again, an expert in, that has conducted hundreds, if not thousands of autopsies, have an independent pathologist review what, again, they don't have, unfortunately, like you said, the body's been cremated. So that's unfortunate because then, we can't do an exhumation and have the body exhumed and have a new autopsy done. But at least having that expert look at what the pathologist found and specifically, the pathology, in terms of the damage to the neck, the areas of, is it plausible that this could have been from a hanging or could it have been manual strangulation? There's things that, this is beyond our medical expertise. This is what a forensic pathologist, that's their job. Like Dr. G, Dana, Dr. G, have Dr. G maybe take a look at it. If you don't know who Dr. G is, she's got her own television show and had a television show in the mid 2000s. And she was a forensic pathologist down in Florida and quite popular. But like having that independent pathologist reviewing everything, including the medical history, the investigation, the criminal investigation, or the incident report that's done, because it was an incident report, by the way that they filed it in, we sometimes call those casualty reports, but it wasn't. Remember, it's when this is a thing that I will tell you about law enforcement, having worked in law enforcement for a long time. You can get tunnel vision. So, sometimes, we see a scene like this and there's an automatic, it looks like this, this is a suicide, obviously, because, looks like she was hanging, right? But if you don't have an open mind, if the agency, the initial officers that are there don't have an open mind, right? And say, wait a minute, things aren't adding up here. This doesn't make sense. Like when the phone's upstairs, why are these pill bottles here? Like some of this doesn't make sense. That's an important consideration to also consider. It's like, look, it looks to me like they framed it initially as like, okay, this is a suicide. We're gonna, that's the assumption we're gonna take here, right? And so that could be dangerous just because then you're not focusing on these other things. You're not focusing on potential people of interest who could be responsible for strangling her. So that's the only other thing I would say would be important is if you could find a forensic pathologist that could look at this independently.
For sure. And that's kind of where I've kind of hit a wall almost, is trying to find one who is able to work outside of their county. Because unfortunately, the Mark Peters, the forensic pathologist who was originally on this, he is the only one for like all our surrounding counties. So I think that it's important that you said an individual one. I wonder if maybe I'll be able to find one searching up that possibly.
Yeah, I would think that, you could still, it's just like, like hiring an expert, and again, a private investigator would do the same thing. They would say, well, we're going to get an expert, our own expert, that's going to look at this, right? They're going to look at the findings of the original pathologist report, the investigation that was done, all the relevant evidence, the medical records, her tox screens, all of the stuff that's relevant to this, having that, fresh set of eyes look at it. And then with the information, the additional information that we now have about, this potential, person of interest, right? And I say that because he hasn't been tried, he hasn't been charged. So, I can't, make that assumption at this point. But that having that information about his behaviors, his criminal history, some of this behavior, that the fact that they were involved in a domestic violence just before this thing happened, that's all relevant. That's all, sets its context. And it's important that they know this information. And I'm not sure how much of that information the original investigators knew at the time that they were looking into this. So again, if they don't see that, if they don't have that information, because if they have that information, it might have been they might have looked at this very differently. I would assume they'd run, if I was on the scene, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of, say, an officer. If I was on the scene and something like this, I've investigated these before. If there's anybody that's in their life, right, and that'd be boyfriends or, any significant others, I would run that person. I would run them. I would look at them just to see, like, well, one, are they wanted? What's their criminal history look like? Because I want to get a sense of, could this possibly be something other than a suicide? And could there be another explanation for why this happened? Right. So I don't know. I assume the officers probably did that at the time. They probably ran him and saw that he was convicted of a felony of a robbery in 2006. So he was a convicted felon, I guess, at the time. Right. So they would have probably known that. Hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's almost what's scarier is that they honestly, if I'm being quite honest, they had a lot of information. They knew that she was a victim of domestic violence immediately. They knew that she had a restraining order on him immediately. This is what I was told from the meeting with both the detective, the original one, and the original assistant coroner's deputy. They both told me that immediately they had all this information available. And I truly think that it was just mishandled, to be quite honest with you. I think it was overlooked. And they have been presented with every piece of evidence I have. I mean, screenshots. Every professional who was there on the scene who I've spoke to are all suspicious. Every single one, down to responding police officers who have reached out through Facebook, who have told me that this case has stuck with them and it doesn't make sense. And nobody can help me go further, though.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the original autopsy. So it says the preliminary cause of death was asphyxia due to hanging. And so the autopsy was performed on January 12th, and then she was released to the Delante funeral home the following day, so very quickly. But so the preliminary cause of death, asphyxia due to hanging, it looks like, there was two coroners involved, but only one wrote the report.
Yeah, I mean, the pathologist is sometimes people confuse it. So there's the coroner, then there's the forensic pathologist. The pathologist is the physician that does the actual autopsy, and the coroner generally, like in this case, in this county, the coroner would have been this Bill Hintz guy, and the guy that took over. So they're charged with the investigation, at the scene. They're the ones that will respond out to the scene, when there's an unattended death. Generally, the coroner will come out. And then they do their own investigation and then their own report, but then the pathologist does their report too. So you kind of have two different reports in these cases, and they work together. They're supposed to work together.
Yeah, I'm just not seeing two reports, but also like going back to what we're saying about the coroner being tied up with his own fraud and embezzlement, and obviously that kind of lifestyle, you're just hedonistic. You're focused on your own problems or bills. You're not focused on your job. Like he didn't follow through with this at all. I think that is evident.
He was at the autopsy, by the way, because I looked at the forensic pathologist report. He was present, and so was the original. There was an original coroner as well that was involved, and her name was Emily Benke. So they were both there.
So the problem is with the coroner who faced these criminal charges, what they needed to go back is do an investigation on the actual autopsies that this person was involved in. And that should have prompted further investigation. Of course, he probably took a plea deal. But had they looked a little further, like that, there's some criminal responsibility on his part. You know, what errors did he make but covered up that aren't going to be revealed, right? Because whatever procedures he missed or didn't fully do his job, then, you know, no one wants to take responsibility. But here we are now. So now we need to get a new coroner to look at this. And I think that is the most difficult thing in cases like this is who's going to fund it, right? And even if we get the funding, like who's going to do it? And then it's almost like you're being your own police. You're going to take it to the prosecution and advocate for justice. And it's very challenging. And so
it's not impossible though. You can do it. It's just that you have to, you know, look at GoFundMe sources. You know, these kinds of things can be done. You know, getting public support, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that's the next step here.
Yeah, well, I definitely want justice for Kayla Seago. She deserves it. And she seems like a lovely person. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about with her, but I really want people to focus on just listening to this. And if you work in this field, like take it seriously and make sure that you thoroughly do your job. And I'm here to help and advocate for her. So let us know what we can do from here. And anybody listening, you're welcome to comment on YouTube. We have our videos there, or on the podcast, contribute to her cause and get the ball rolling, because I know this isn't an isolated incident. There are more cases like this, and I hope that we can get justice. And so I really appreciate your time, Lexi, and I know you love your sister. And from sister to sister, I have sisters, so I really felt a connection when I met with you, and I really wanted to, I really want to see this through.
Thank you so much. I've told you before, but you've really just been like an angel on earth for us. Within this whole thing, I mean, you do what you can, which is more than enough. You go above and beyond. And I am truly just so grateful for the connection that we have made with you. And even just you pointing us in the right direction, as well as you, Mr. Craig. We are so grateful for both of you guys for even spending time and helping us out, because, you know, I think fresh set of eyes really brings those questions and points us in the right direction. And I think that both me and my sister Cherokee are very determined to get justice for Kayla, and we will not stop.
Yeah, and it was wonderful to meet Cherokee the other day too. So meet with both of you guys together, and you guys are so wonderful. And thank you for sharing this information with me, and keep me posted and let me know how we can help. I will do anything I can. So thank you for your time today, and thank you to everyone that's listening out there.
All right. Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you, Craig.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.